Hi, welcome to part two of a four-part series on how you can target your communications, whether it's to investors, clients, or at work, and how you can use the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator test, how you can know your own personality, and how you can use that to communicate with others who may have the same or different personality than yours. A little bit about me. My name is CJ Liu. I'm certified as a Myers-Briggs Type Indicator practitioner. I've been a business and career coach for 13 years. I have a weekly radio show called Fired Up with CJ, and it's on YouTube, and I have a Facebook page and also a website that you can get all sorts of great self-help information. Prior to doing all this stuff in media, I worked 20 years in Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft, GE, and Clorox in a variety of different positions: marketing, biz dev, product development, and finance. Now, in the first part of this four-part series, we were talking about how important it is when you're talking to clients, investors, your boss, coworkers to know their different personalities. And in part one, we talked about extroversion and introversion. We're going to have a very similar format today, and we're going to be talking about sensing and intuitive. And again, we're going to be using the identical format that we did in part one, where we'll be looking at how you can identify someone who's sensing or intuitive in a meeting and some communication tips on working with those two different preference types. All right, so we're going to cover the first, which is sensing. So again, let's actually review. There's four different preferences in the Myers-Briggs. The first letter is extroversion or introversion, which we covered in part one. In part two, and the second preference is how someone takes in information. So there's people who are sensing, and they'll be in the meeting and they'll want to say, well, let's just talk this over. That's kind of their a theme to describe what a sensing person would be like. And they're really anchored in the five senses. If you can touch it, feel it, taste it, smell it, hear it, then it exists. They want to know stuff in the now. They don't care about the future or what the future and possibilities would be. What is the practical thing that we can do now? And so when they're looking at information, they're taking in the information, focus on what they can actually discern with their five senses. And when they're meeting with people, they really want real, actual facts, details, concrete examples. They're very practical and common sense, and they like to have the information that they get applied. If I don't understand why we're talking about this, then I really don't understand it at all. And as you recall from part one, 70% of the people out there are this preference type, and even more so in the corporate environment, and that's the survey of people within the US. If you're in a meeting with someone who's taking information, who has a sensing preference, they may have like to talk about specifics. They like things with plans and procedures. They would prefer to have a step-by-step explanation in a linear fashion. They probably don't really like long-term strategic plans or anything related to long-term strategic plans, communications. And they're going to trust their own experience. So you may say, hey, trust me. And if they can't relate to it with their own five senses, they can't relate to it. When you're talking to someone who has a sensing preference, they're going to be very practical. They'll be very plain in their language, precise and simple language. They won't be using a whole bunch of flowery languages or poems or all those types of things to communicate. They're kind of tried, true. What is it that we need to know? How are we going to do that? When is this going to happen? That kind of conversation. So you'll notice that this is very different than an intuitive, which you're going to talk about next. So an intuitive, how people who prefer intuition will say, well, I need to think about that a little bit. And one thing that I should preface when reading both of these descriptions, whether it's intuitive or sensing, is this is generally what you'll find for people who prefer intuition, and generally what you will find with people who prefer sensing. So when I'm reading through these, there may be some things that you think, hey, that's not me. That's me, but that's not me. That's me, but that's not me. Um, Take heart that that's normal. And in fact, there are some people who are on the borderline of any of these preferences. They'll be literally almost in the midpoint between two preference types. So they would be between the midpoint of intuitive and sensing. In fact, I'm on the midpoint of thinking and feeling. So you may actually relate to both of these, but there's probably going to be one that you lean to slightly. So if both of these things, both of these descriptions sound familiar to you, it's probably because you're in the midpoint of both of these things. Okay, people who prefer intuition. So let's talk about people who have the preferences of intuition. So when you're talking to them, they're really going to want to know about the future. So how's that going to affect us in the future? So I'm an intuitive type, and so when I'm in a meeting, someone is saying, "Hey, we're going to roll out, this particular product," and then when I'm thinking about it, I'm actually thinking about 5 steps ahead. Like, well, won't that impact this in the future? Won't it impact that in the future? And I'm always, you'll find that people intuitive, they like to talk about possibilities. Oh, I think that model is really interesting because we could apply it in this, or that fashion. And they really like change, just for change's sake. They like to have a lot of change and variety in their life. So when you're talking to someone who has a preference of intuition, they'll be talking about patterns. They'll be talking about, well, what's the meaning of that? What do you think this means? They want to know the big picture. In fact, if you're working with someone who's intuitive, they may want to see the big picture more than all the details that make up that a sensing person want to talk about. So the big picture trends, and they like to synthesize information across lots of different disciplines. So you may be talking to them about a business application. They'll say, well, that's interesting because a similar process happens in biology that's very similar to that. And here's what they say in biology. So they'll actually be taking concepts from different disciplines and synthesizing them together. In a meeting, you'll notice that people who prefer intuition like to talk about ideas. They like to brainstorm. They like to talk about the long term. They may get glazed when you're talking about details. I often, when someone's telling a story and they're telling me all the details of I got out of the car, and then after I got out of the car, on my trip, I took a taxi. That would bore an intuitive to death. They get bored with details. They like to create and grasp and share ideas. They don't like limits. So if you said, well, we have to do this project in X amount of time, so you're going to need to scale back your ideas. They like to have specifics that relate to a pattern. They will talk in symbols. They'll say, wow, today I feel so great about this project. It's like a blossoming flower. So they'll be using metaphors, analogies. They trust models. They want to look at the big picture model and concepts, theories, and frameworks. And they'll be the ones in the room asking why. All right, so you may not know, maybe it's really easy for you to tell from these descriptions which person you are, maybe not. So I have an exercise for us to go through. So I'm going to have you look at an image. And I'm going to give you, 30 seconds to look at it. And then what I want you to do is jot down on a piece of paper what you notice about the image. Just share what you see. And then we're going to discuss later on in the slides what you see. So here's an image. I'd like you to spend 30 seconds, and I'd like you to jot down on a piece of paper. This isn't a test. It's just more noticing what kind of information you take in. All right, so I'll have you put your pencils down or whatever you're writing down, and let's take a look at the slide. I did this same exercise in my MBTI training, And I just found this a fascinating exercise because the people who are sensing would describe literally what they saw, the colors that they saw, the actual images that they saw. They would focus on the size of the images, the color, shapes, and artist's name. Whereas the person in intuition would be focusing on the big picture. They would be making a story out of the images that they saw, and trying to come up with meanings for them. So if people who would be looking back at this picture would say, "Oh, I noticed that there's a boat here on the right-hand side. There's a man's head that's in the center. There's a hand reaching out from the sky with some clouds. I see that there's kind of these rainbow, blue, purple, blue, green, yellow, orange kind of rainbows. They're going to be focusing on there's a clock, so they're all the details. There is someone who's intuitive would say, wow, it looks, in fact, this is what our group said, it looks like the hand of God coming down, exploring the possibilities that this person has if they were to just transcend time. Okay, so there's a marked difference between different ways that an intuitive and a sensing person would take in information. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about which, now that you've done that exercise and you've seen all that information about sensing intuitive, think about which type you may be. And one thing that would be interesting is think of a time when someone asked you to make a decision and you really felt frustrated. What was the information that was missing? How was the information presented? So, for example, my dear friend Kelly said her brother was asking her, hey, do you want to go on this vacation? It's going to be super fun. And it's going to be really, really interesting. And I think you'll learn a lot about a culture that you don't understand. And she wanted to know, well, what time is the flight? What are the dates? So it was very much more of a sensing type of thing. And she's actually right in the middle. So she cared about both, but in that particular example, she was looking for more sensing information, and she felt frustrated when her brother would not give her that information or was kind of sketchy about that information. All right, so I'm going to take I'm going to take 15 seconds, and you can kind of take a look and see, maybe jot down on a piece of paper what you think your type may be, and think of an example of when you felt frustrated and why. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, now that you have a general sense of your, whether you're sensing or you prefer sensing or intuition, we're going to talk about how you may communicate with another person, some communication tips. So if you're working with someone who prefers sensing, in terms of how they take in information, you're going to want to provide specifics. You're going to want to be practical with what you present. You're going to want to explain to them the immediate applications of what you're talking about and give them concrete proof that what you're saying is true. If you're working along with them, they would like to share their observations. They would like you to present the information sequentially with lots of facts and details, and they would like you to show them the plan, the procedure, and then link it to current realities, and that you're preserving what works before you introduce a whole bunch of new ways of doing things. If you're talking to a sensing type, please try to avoid metaphors or censoring words. Now, how about the intuition types, people who prefer intuition? So with people who prefer intuition, you want to talk about the big picture. You want to be open to ideas and possibilities. You want to help them integrate and link various concepts that you may have talked over time or over a period of time that are related to the information at hand. You want to offer alternatives. So you could say, hey, we could do this or that, or here's 3 different ideas. Pick which one. They like to look at thumbnails, kind of the big picture of things. They like to brainstorm. When you're collaborating and engaging them, share minimum detail because they'll go into a little data coma. Make sure to discuss long-term implications of what you're doing and show what the possibilities are for the future. And listen to their dreams, vision, and ideas, and don't go too much into reality checking with them because they're probably not at that stage yet. They want to brainstorm. So let's wrap up and let's figure out what's the game plan? What are we going to do with this information? Well, here are some steps to put this information into practice. The first is to understand your Myers-Briggs type. You can actually go through the slides again and decide after reading the information more carefully what you think your type is, or you can take a test online. I'll be in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of information about how to communicate with someone who's the opposite type. And what I would suggest is to take baby steps, because if you try to do and digest everything at once, it can kind of get overwhelming. Especially the Myers-Briggs stuff is so rich and deep that it can get very overwhelming and you can get lost in the data. So pick one of the ideas that you heard. So let's say that you're an intuitive person talking to a sensing person. So in that case, or even regardless of who you're talking to, practice just talking with details and specifics and talk about the here and now, or just pick one thing, talk about specifics. All right, now let's say that you're sensing, you're talking to an intuitive, just pick one idea, talk about the big picture. So every time you have a presentation, a slide, or a communication, talk about the big picture first. So pick one idea, practice it for a week, and you may find that it feels uncomfortable, and that's because it's not your natural preference. So much like if you're a right-handed and I ask you to write your signature with your left hand, you could, but it would feel uncomfortable and it wouldn't maybe feel authentic or look right to you. But it's just basically building upon the foundation of your preferences and expanding your skills to another area. So it probably will initially feel uncomfortable and it feels inauthentic, but I think the one thing to keep in mind is that really what you're trying to do is build rapport and understand someone else and go into their world first. It's almost, you can think of it as a way to build courtesy and comfort for the other person. So you want to practice this on friends, family, or anyone that are opposites, or even just practice on people who have the same style of you, and they may not like it, but you can practice with them. And even, I think really it's about getting feedback and refining over time. After you practice this for a week, or maybe it will take you 2 weeks, it will start feeling natural, and then you'll automatically be able to do both things. Just like being ambidextrous, you'll be able to communicate to both types preferences at the same time. And as I mentioned before, you want to get feedback, refine, and then once you master one skill, move on to the next one. So I would go into some of the slides where I was giving communication tips and just go step by step through that list. All right, so how do you get your MBTI style if you would like it? You can go to my website at mywholelife.net and you can order a report, an MBTI report for me. You can also work with me at mywholelife.net. I'm life.net, and you can get some coaching with me to, once I know your style, I can give you specific information on how you would take your style and work with communicating with others like we have talked about today. We can go in depth about that and talk about maybe some of the challenges that you're having, or practice, or whatever you want to do. We can also talk about your Myers-Briggs type and decision making, conflict. Because it's your personality, it shows up in all aspects of your life. So I have a bunch of materials and coaching that I can do with you on that. If you'd like to email me, my email is cjlou@gmail.com. So thank you for your time, and look forward to talking to you when we get to part 3, when we're going to be talking about the third preference, which is thinking and feeling. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.